Good afternoon. The Georgetown Cultural Citizens Memorial Association would like to welcome you to the 2021 Juneteenth virtual panel discussion. My name is Regina Durden, and I will be moderating this conversation of health, education, and justice for all. Before we get started, I'd like to turn it over to Ms. Paulette Taylor, the president of Gccma. And immediately following Ms. Taylor, Dr. Ron Swain will open with a prayer, and we will have a special rendition of the Negro National Anthem by Kirk Franklin. Ms. Taylor?
Thank you, Regina. Good afternoon. Our history is forever an evolving mystery, as our assumption has been. We're celebrating our 69th Juneteenth in Georgetown. We are constantly unfolding earlier Juneteenth celebrations and historical documents of events held here. Recently, I had a conversation with a 92-year-old expressing celebrating Juneteenth as a young girl. In January 1980, Texas became the first state to declare Juneteenth as a state holiday, thanks to the late former state representative Al Edwards, who recently passed away April 2020. I recall getting a phone call from Representative Edwards, praising Georgetown for its Juneteenth efforts and apologizing for not being in attendance. In 1975, a Georgetown organized group, CMA, Citizen Memorial Association, headed by Harvey Miller, became the overseer of the Citizens Memorial Garden Cemetery on Highway 29. In 1985, the first banquet was held at the Stonehaven Housing Center and has progressed each year. Georgetown Cultural Citizen Memorial Association, GCCMA, was created to provide an overall vision and mission of culture and history to youth and adults throughout the community. In recent years, Juneteenth celebrations have become inclusive of current issues with the theme. This year's theme, Education, Health, and Social Justice for All, addresses current issues while embracing reflections of our historical heritage and freedom. GCCMA, with its facilities, Willie Hall Center, and the Shotgun House, are projecting greater events for our community in the safe future. On behalf of the GCCMA organization, we extend a Juneteenth welcome with thanks to all for your participation and support, hoping and praying that soon we will safely return to a safe environment for a continued annual celebration event. Welcome panelists and those attending this event. Thank you.
Will you join me now in prayer? One of my favorite theologians is Dr. Howard Thurman, who was a mentor to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Both men were graduates of Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And today's prayer is around the word courage. And I invite you to join me as we listen to these words from Dr. Howard Thurman. I need courage. The concern I lay before God today is my need for courage. I need courage to be honest. Honest in my use of words. Honest in accepting responsibility. Honest in dealing with myself. Honest in dealing with my fellow human beings. Honest in my relationship with God. I need courage to face the problems of my own life, the problems of personal values. They are sometimes confused. They are sometimes unreal. They are too exacting for comfort. The problems of my job. Perhaps I am working at cross purposes with my own desires, ambitions, and equipment. Perhaps I am arrogant instead of taking pride in doing work well. Perhaps I am doing what I'm doing just to prove a point, spending a lifetime to prove a point that is not worth proving at all. Perhaps I never found anything that could challenge me, and my life seems wasted. So here in this community of faith, I lay bare before God my need for courage, the strength to be honest, for the guidance to deal effectively with the problems of my life and those of the world. Oh God, give me courage. Amen.
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 I like this part right here. Come on. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the till victory is won. Now we add a little something to it. Just encourage you. We're going to take it to church later. Let's go! We'll keep marching, fighting till the victory is won. To all my brothers out there. Hold your head up, brothers, till the victory is won. To all my sisters in the struggle. Keep believing, sister, till the victory is won. Till that day. Till that day comes. Hey. Let us march on to victory. Till victory is won.
Beautiful. I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Wonderful. Thank you, Khaled, for your words. And thank you, Dr. Swain, for your prayer. And again, I hope you enjoyed. Mr. Franklin did it again, right? So just before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping things that I want to go over with you. Just to let you know, everyone except the panelists will be muted to preserve sound quality. If you have comments and questions, we encourage you to post them in the chat. If we have time at the end, we'll go back through those questions and ask our panelists. This session is being recorded and will be posted on Gccma's website. So let us begin. I want to start by introducing our panelists to you, our distinguished panelists. I'm so honored that they took the time out of their busy schedules to spend an hour with us to talk about education, health, and justice for all. So what I want to do is start with Ms. Latoya Easter. So let me, I have it in gallery view. So Latoya, wave your hand and Let's introduce you. Miss Easter is the principal at Eastview High School here in Georgetown. Miss Easter has her bachelor's degree in literary studies from the University of Houston Central, a master's degree in administration and leadership from Grand Canyon University, and an educational specialist degree in education and leadership from the College of Doctoral Studies from Grand Canyon University. Ms. Easter served as principal at 4 Points Middle School in Leander, where she was responsible for managing all aspects of campus, including creating a positive learning environment for both the staff and the students, and monitoring and evaluating the advancement of students' achievements. Prior to that, Ms. Easter served as the associate principal in Round Rock, an assistant principal at Rouse High School in Leander, and as a teacher, English teacher, head basketball coach, administrator in Alvin ISD. Ms. Easter has been very busy, and she enjoys writing, being physically active, and traveling, but most of all, she enjoys serving students, teachers, and parents in the community. Welcome, Ms. Easter.
Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Next, we have Mr. Derrick Neal. Mr. Neal currently serves as the Executive Director of the Williamson County Cities Health District, WCCHD. Wave for us, Mr. Neal. Yay. WCCHD, that's worse, that's like Gccma, lots of initials, right? Is one of only 7 public health accredited health departments in Texas, and currently ranks as the 6th healthiest county in Texas, ranked second.
That is correct. We were 6th last year. This year, we are the 2nd healthiest county in Williamson County, and my staff would not let me down if they wouldn't let me get away with it if I didn't correct you. So
okay.
The 2nd healthiest, yeah.
Yes, well, congratulations to you on that. The 2nd healthiest county in Texas, according to the National County of Health Rankings report. Mr. Neal has continuously served the underrepresented communities for over 20 years. He holds a master in public administration from the University of Illinois with a focus in program evaluation, and a Bachelor of Science in Sociology from Jackson State University. Mr. Neal is a certified Centers for Disease Control trainer in capacity building communities, a program that focuses on evaluating and developing programs to mobilize and sustain communities. Mr. Neal serves as the immediate past president of the Texas Association of City and County Health Officials, where he has been a member for the past 6 years, and was recently appointed by Governor Abbott to sit on the Texas State Housing and Health Services Coordination Council as the Health Services Entities Representative. Continuous improvement spurs Mr. Neal's quest to evaluate, develop, and implement best practices for public health, infrastructure, safety programs for all communities to support economic, environmental, and social sustainability through health equity practices. So we look forward to hearing your views also. Thank you so much and welcome. Next, we have Mr. Wayne Sneed. Mr. Sneed is a sergeant at the Austin Independent School District Police. Mr. Sneed joins us with over 38 years of service with both criminal justice and law enforcement agencies. Mr. Sneed received his Bachelor of Criminal Justice and Business Management degrees from Texas State University and began his law enforcement career as a police officer for the San Marcos Police Department. From 2004 to 2008, Mr. Sneed also served as the Chief of Internal Affairs for the Health and Human Services Office of Inspector General. Mr. Sneed is a certified instructor for both the National White Collar Crime Center and National Insurance Crime Bureau. He possesses a training instructor certification, school-based law enforcement officer certification, and a host of others. He's certified Inspector General with the National Association of Inspector Generals, and he has also earned a Certified Public Management designation from the William P. Hobby Center for Public Service at Texas State University in Round Rock. Mr. Snead was also appointed by the governor as an advisory board member to the Texas Juvenile Justice Advisory Board. So welcome to you all. As audience, as you can see, we have a well-rounded panel, and we're going to hear some wonderful perspectives. So let's get started. So GCCMA has prepared 3 questions for the panelists to respond to, and each question we're going to ask each one from their perspective expertise to answer the questions. Each panelist has been given 3 minutes to respond to each question. So let's get started. The first question is, what are the issues that you see and how can we attain equity in education, health, and justice systems? We'll start with Ms. Easter.
Well, thank you again for having me. I really appreciate this opportunity to really engross ourselves in a really important conversation. I was trying to find a way to sum up all my thoughts when it comes to this question. And so I'm going to talk through a few things. I think some of the things that we see that are disparaging between our connection in education and how to serve each and every student in every way possible, whether it be socio-emotionally, academically, to make sure they can reach their full potential. It starts with a disconnect between equity versus equality, right? Equality meaning that every kid has the opportunity to be served the exact same way. If they're served the exact same way, they're all going to reach the same outcome. Well, that's just not reasonable. That's like saying that all of us were born with the same tools, the same skills, and the same circumstances and conditions. Whereas equity says, instead of seeing kids as all the same, we see them as diverse individuals with unique needs, and also we don't see them as in a deficit mindset. You know, kids come to us with assets, and how we utilize those assets to make sure that we can support them in many ways is really essential to how we serve them. However, in our system, sometimes the systemic supports that we have do not speak well for all of our students that are in our system. And so if you think, for example, a student who may be migrating to us from Mexico, or a student who may have come from an at-risk or economically disadvantaged background, a student who has special needs, special services, those supports that we give them cannot be equivalent to each and every other student that we may serve in our system. So how we find the resources to make sure that we are meeting students' needs is really, really important. I think a struggle sometimes is this disconnect between what's fair versus just, right? Is it fair that we give kids who may need additional supports opportunities that we don't give the next kid next to them because they don't need it, right? We want to meet kids where they are, and we want to make sure that we extend their potential. And so sometimes when we think about politics and the way that they play and influence some of the outcomes of our students' success inside of Texas education with legislation, whether it be TA policy or legislation policy, sometimes this gets lost in the argument that kids come to us with different values, different assets, different cultural and heritage, and how we serve them in a system and how we meet those needs has to be an exponential, really deep dive into the resources that we give them, how we're making sure that leadership is leading in a way that cultivates the right type of climate and atmosphere to embrace students where they are, and then how we serve and extend them in a way want to ensure that when they exit our system, we didn't fail them by leaving their experience short because of our inadequacies of our service. And so I see so many different things when it comes to diversity and inclusivity, right? Students, whether you could be in a fluid school and still have a lot of different needs of students. Just because a student comes from a wealthy background or a poor background or a middle of the class doesn't mean they don't come with different needs. And how we make sure that they feel inclusive in our system by making sure that we embrace their background and their heritage is really critical and essential. I think that we've had conversations about students being able to identify with someone inside of their school that's not just a peer, but also a teacher, a leader, a cafeteria worker, custodian, a bus driver, and how that influences what they feel like they can identify with and authenticate with. And so I would say that those are some of the things that we're facing in education, thank you, Dr. Boyd, that I feel like are a part of this conversation and are essential to how we move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Easter. Now, Mr. Neal.
I think that Ms. Easter adequately answered that question for all of us, including public health. What I will contribute to that dialogue is that when we talk about health equity and public health, specifically with our population, African Americans and people of color in general in Williamson County, we really focus on breaking generational curses. So as I hear Ms. Easter talking about, reaching the kids in school, she's trying to, the intent is to really break those cycles of disenfranchisement. We have areas in Williamson County where we have a disparity in life expectancy simply because of where you live and access to quality care. So when we talk about health equity, I often think about it in terms of having access to care, transportation, things of that nature. But we have to begin to break those generational cycles. And the quote that I always think about is so much easier to build stronger children than repair broken men. And in public health, that's what we find that we're trying to do. We attempt to keep people out the emergency rooms in Williamson County, because once you end up in the emergency room as a form of treatment, you're probably going to have a chronic condition that you have to manage the rest of your life. That's going to cost all of us money. If we're able to really address those indicators at the root level, we hear ACEs now, that's adverse childhood experiences. And what happens with that child between the ages of 0 and 3 are pretty good predictors of how their life will end up. So we really have to begin to address causes upstream before they become too expensive for us to handle. And that's what we're seeing in public health. We've seen that during the COVID response, where even in Taylor, Texas, where we set up a COVID vaccination site for, I think, about 6 weeks, we only were able to reach 31% vaccination rate within that community. So we're missing a gap when it comes to trust. So building that trust, breaking those generational curses, and really ensuring that when we talk about inclusiveness, as LaTanya was talking about, that we're intentionally including individuals and not giving them a seat at the table, but we're giving them a voice at the table that ultimately impacts policy. I can't tell you how many times that I've seen or met with people in Williamson County, people of color, who are giving the privilege of sitting at the table, but when it comes to policy, their voices aren't heard. So we need to be intentional about being inclusive. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed?
Thank you. Once again, thank you for having me here today. My predecessors have covered a wide range of information that I had in my list. So I'll address the justice system. Obviously, I'm approaching 4 decades in this profession. I've seen some very disheartening things that have happened, especially to men and women of color in our justice system. I think one of the biggest challenges is getting representation in our juvenile and our criminal justice system that supports the population that they're actually serving. And I say that to say that, voting and that vote really carries a lot of weight, and getting out and putting people in who share our values in the criminal justice system is going to be important. Criminal justice reform is way overdue. We have young men and women, especially our young men and women of color, who are doing very hard time for very small, non-life-threatening crimes in our society, drug, alcohol, things of that nature. So the reform needs to be there, and providing the social services there to deal with the epidemic of drug and mental health issues that are in our community, and then making that, as the previous panelist said, making that accessible to especially our families and in our community of color. So.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed. Gosh, there's so much in what all of you said. We could have a whole hour, 3-hour conversation on all of the things that you said. I have so many questions, so I'm gonna call you guys, okay? So let's go ahead and go to our next question is, how can we work together to create policies to improve equity, mental health, and access in these areas of education, health, and justice? Mr. Neal, we'll start with you this time.
Without running the risk of sound facetious, I think from my perspective is really just being inclusive, allowing those individuals who represent the community to really have a voice at the table and not just a seat. And really, even if it's at the most baseline level, see those policies enacted. That's incredibly important. One of the things that I've been challenging as recently as yesterday, my staff with is really, we have to begin to look at intergenerational programming in terms of how we can have a consistent voice from our children, from our teenagers, and from our adults, as well as our seniors. We have a lot of intergenerational households in Williamson County. So I think we start at the most baseline level and move not only during the strategic planning or our community health assessment process, gauge those opinions of our representative communities in Williamson County, but that those representative communities have an ongoing voice. So we're able to pivot and adjust accordingly to meet those public health needs. And I think that really starts with being intentionally inclusive of those communities of color. We are past making recommendations and suggestions. We just have to take action and have faith that those steps will take root. So we just have to be intentional from a policy perspective. But again, that starts with voting, as the sergeant alluded to.
Thank you. Mr. Sneed?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. I'll piggyback on what Mr. Neal hit on, which is, that inclusiveness. One of the things I commend our superintendent, our recently hired superintendent and police chief on doing is we started doing community retreats where we're inviting our community, especially our community members, parents of color, former students, current students, into these panel discussions, and it's broken out into different departments throughout the school district and getting feedback on what's working, what's not working, what direction we need to go, and see if we can look at viable options to increase equity and to accessibility to services, because some of our campuses obviously are more economically supported than some of our Title I campuses. So building equity within the district, and I think that starts even by looking at discipline. We're looking at our discipline numbers and finding that a lot of our discipline numbers have a lot of disparity in it. So, and how do we correct that moving forward, right? And so engaging those conversations have been, it's been very difficult to listen to, but in order to have change, you got to be open to listening to where the problems exist and how to move forward in a positive way to correct those disparities.
Thank you, Mr. Sneed, Sergeant Sneed, and Ms. Easter.
All right, so I think that both gentlemen hit on some very important aspects of how we come together to make change. One of the things I would say is that's sometimes missing when you think about community within schools is how do we engage with all different dynamics of our community? And so how do we bring down the barriers that may exist, whether that may be for lack of knowledge, whether it may be for fear. Sometimes in our Latinx community, there's sometimes a fear of connecting with schools because of cultural differences or cultural boundaries that exist, whether it be language or just an understanding of how schools work in the United States. Or how do we also bring opportunities to the community. That sometimes is a delicate balance, because some of the things that we want our community to engage into, whether it be a college and career night, a fair, or we're asking parents to come and learn more about what we're doing on campus, some of those engagement pieces appeal to some people in different ways. And so how do we have enough of a menu, a buffet of different items, where people feel like these are subjects that matter to them, that they want to be a part of, and also that they're going to be included with that voice and choice to be able to express themselves in a transparent way. I think that leadership, also fellowship, and also the transparency in which we give our service to the stakeholders that we have is crucial. People have to trust you to be able to follow you. And you have to lead in a way that sets the expectations for what it is that you're trying to achieve, and make sure that it's clear. I think there's a question in the chat here about how important is expectation on the part of the staff, on a campus. Well, expectations are very important, but those expectations can't be a bottleneck. It has to be that we're exploring students in a way that allows them to be empowered to be who they are and be unique and authentic. But also we have set high expectations that whether you came to us with, high test scores or A's and B's or all A's from wherever we've inherited you from, we're going to make sure that you're exposed to everything that you would like to be able to reach your potential in any other way that you would like to go. And so when we think about being intentional, we have to be intentional with ways that we serve our stakeholders so that they feel like they can actually have not just a seat at the table, but they can actually have a voice at the table and also take action with us.
Thank you so much. So I heard to create policy, very important, intentional inclusion, not just inclusion, intentional inclusion, engagement, creative engagement, looking at disparities, open and listening, open and being able to listen. All of those things are important. And so what are we doing to ensure that that happens? That's the question, community. So let's go on to our next question. Now that we've asked if you're aware of current policies that exist to improve equity and access, now we'd like to ask, are you aware of any current policies that currently exist to improve equity access in the areas of health, education, and justice? And we'll start with you, Sergeant Sneed.
Thank you once again. We're in the process, as I mentioned before, of having these community retreats. And out of these community retreats, one of the things that we are working on, and Ms. Easter alluded to it, is just that transparency. And I think Mr. Neal said it as well. Creating a transparent process so that our families, our staff, and our students can engage in feedback. One of the things that we have really listened to our community on is eliminating the school to prison pipeline, right? And so one of the things that we've done is obviously we've changed how we police. Police were in the past called and used as the heavy by many of our administrators in order to get students to comply. That changed with law, state law, but it also it is a cultural change. And I'm over the mental health unit and just looking at our students that with disabilities, or sometimes if the principal doesn't understand how to deal with it, the police were called. Also, a student is expelled from school and returns to school, we do not is an imminent threat, a person on campus or themselves. So just looking at how our policy have in place are going to impact our students, or a limit on how many days a student can be sent to our alternative learning center. We found in the past that students were sent there for eternity. Some of them end up graduating from our alternative learning center, and that's not appropriate. I mean, that's not the appropriate educational environment, as Ms. Easter alluded to. And so we're really looking at right now totally revamping our policies and our system and how it's going to impact and getting that community from all levels, the teachers, the administrators, the students, former students, and the parents, to engage in those conversations to make sure that we're seeing all points as we move forward.
Okay. Thank you, Sergeant Sneed. Ms. Easter.
So one of the things that has always been a part of this conversation, but I think more so this past year and a half, more than anything, is this idea of a pipeline to poverty. And what I'm speaking of is we had a pandemic, right? And before the pandemic, we already had issues that we needed to address in education. And so now we've gone through kind of a crisis in society, whether it be a crisis of the pandemic, a crisis of some social injustices that we felt as a community, politics, all these things have played a part in this last year and a half. And so our students now have been engrossed in a different world that's been influenced by so many other things that we already had to address within our system. And what we're seeing right now is a little bit of a, well, I see things addressed through policies at the district level, from district to district that address equity. What I haven't seen is an embracing that at a Texas legislation level. Example would be recently I saw that there was some Texas legislation that came out that basically focused on Texas history being taught at a broader level than what it already is in education, which really honestly is a disconnect to what's currently happening in education, because we do teach Texas history. And so when you think about making sure that our students are receiving the type of educational resources and exposure that they need to be educated about how they can be a part of the conversation, you have to start with what's happening in the classroom. That is the most pivotal effect that a student has, is what's happening minute to minute in the classroom. And if they don't have an opportunity to take a course that's like African American studies, Mexican American studies, these other type of heritage-based courses, so they can learn the history of all types of people, then when do they get that education and how does it happen? And sometimes it doesn't always take place in our home. Parents, for many reasons, are also experiencing many different things in their livelihood that may not always allow them to have those conversations that some of us may have been privileged to have as we were growing up with adults who served us outside of the school setting. I would say from, as Sergeant Wayne, Steve spoke to, our SROs, our school resource officers, that role has changed significantly inside of schools, and it's a powerful one that's really important. Because what students get to see is that law enforcement is not just these individuals that are there to take away their rights or take away some freedoms that they own, but really can be educators in what they can do and how they can behave in the civilization, in society, in character, and all those great things that come with having a person like that on our campus. Additionally, I would say that if you think about some of the things that are happening, speaking to Mr. Neal in the health industry, social emotional wellness for kids also depends on how they feel, literally feel, in their body and their soul as a person. And so if they're coming to school and they have not had the shots that they need, or they need to go see a medical doctor and those things haven't occurred in their livelihood, well, they're not going to perform at the level they possibly could if their needs were being met. And so I think some policies have to shift towards really focusing on what are those deficits that we have to turn around to make them assets, and really focus on the gaps that we have so that our kids are not in this pipeline of poverty because of their circumstances.
Thank you, Ms. Easter. Mr. Neal.
Wow, they don't leave me much to contribute to that, but what I will offer is that I think that what we really need to look at is really just the disinvestment in prisons in Texas, and how our educational system truly, if you look at the progressive discipline, even in some of our ISDs in Williamson County, to me, it's a way to condition a lot of our young men and women to be ready for that penal system. So I think we have to get ready. We need to disinvest in the prison system and overinvest in education. I can't say that enough, being a public health person. Now, the answer to your question is there isn't any legislation that's directly addressing equities when it comes to public health. It's not happening. the way it is truly partisan, and that we're receiving additional funding to address the inequities that COVID-19 has created. But we were dealing with those things prior to COVID-19, and they've since been exacerbated. So I see this as putting a Band-Aid on a broken arm, but public health is used to doing a lot with little resources. So we'll move forward. And until policy isn't enacted, we'll be in this posture for quite some time, you know, and that's just the reality. It's not a lot of interest in public health because, like education, sometimes you don't see the outcomes, the positive outcomes, until way after someone's term or appointment is over with, or their cycle is gone in terms of how long they were in office. And that's the hill that we've climbed. So fundamentally, nothing has been done on the legislative front from my perspective. But truly, if we're talking about root causes, we got to quit building prisons and overinvest in education.
Thank you.
It's really, finally, it's a form of systemic racism when we talk about the conditioning of our babies through school with the progressive discipline. And I know when I first met Mr. Swain, he and I had this question this conversation a couple of years ago.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Very interesting. Gosh, you know, we've discussed issues, policies, and that's vital to attaining equity and access. And it's like, where are we? What about engagement? How can we ensure engagement? How can we ensure that people or the community is involved, right? But we have to ask, what is the call to action for the community? Where do we go from here? So that's the final question before we may even have time for some of our community questions. But if you could address, where do you think we go from here? We'll start with Ms. Easter.
So this is a part of the conversation, and the individuals on this conversation really speak to something that we really need more of. When you start talking about education, you cannot talk about it without talking about whether it be law enforcement, talking about health, or talking about politics. Those can't be left out of the conversation. And so I think that more partnerships from the community level and beyond, so that we are diving deep into these conversations and also creating actions from the school level. It's about creating actions inside of our resources of how we're educating kids and how we're educating our staff to shift the mindset. Because this is a very delicate and difficult conversation sometimes, because you're asking people to really reassess their values and beliefs. And when you're reassessing your values and beliefs, that can be something that is a struggle for a long period of time, which is the reason why some of the actions that we wish we were taking in education seem stagnant. So to make sure that these conversations continue, I think you have to continue to invite the right people to the table to have these discussions, so that there's not an element left out about how we serve our kids to make sure they reach the best possible outcomes and have the best possible opportunities possible as they exit our system and enter society.
Thank you, Mr. Neal.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We just have to push ourselves to have courageous conversations. One of the things, you know, if we're just honest about Williamson County, and we talk about Javier Ambler and things that have happened, you know, I've been in Texas nearly 20 years. I spent my first 10 in the city of Houston before venturing out to Abilene, Victoria, and now here. And what I realized is that Houston isn't representative of Texas, but those other places are, in terms of my reality as an African-American man. Having said that, we're leading conversations this fall, talking about race. And to LaTanya's point, you know, we partnered with Prevention First to come and facilitate that community conversation in Williamson County, because someone has to take the lead in that regard if we're going to really begin to address some of these things that are going to be painful to a lot of us. And that's just the reality of it. So we're taking that step, and I won't mention the employee's name, but I will mention this, and we have a fantastic staff, awesome staff. Obviously, we're accredited. And she's a 20-something-year-old white female. And during my first 6 months, she mentioned to me that she knows she benefits from the privilege of her race, and we really need to begin to take leadership. So for someone to challenge me, who doesn't, I don't want to say they don't have a iron in the fire, because they're just as passionate as I am. But that was really meaningful to me, and it showed me that we do have hope to really turn the corner. And sometimes it's just our responsibility to see how far we can carry that pail of water. It's not always our responsibility to take it home to the promised land or whatever. So I think step by step and bit by bit, and having these conversations, we'll get there. We just have to have a willingness to do so, and not worry about the detractors.
Yes, thank you. Sergeant Sneed. Sergeant Sneed, you may be frozen.
Yes, thank you. Am I?
Yeah, you're good.
Am I good now?
You're good.
Okay. So I think it goes back to what the panelists have already alluded to, and some of the things I talked about. I think the community engagement and the community retreats, and the challenge is, how do you get those families that Ms. Easter alluded or I spoke about earlier, your Latinx, your families of your immigrant families, to come to that table and to have those discussions about how that school district, whatever school district it may be, is providing the needed level of education for their particular child. Your students of kids with disabilities. We have an entire campus of students that just have disabilities, and getting those parents to come to the table and to give. I think many times we believe that we always know what's best for people, and without asking them what is it that they need, we're offering something in many cases that may not meet, as Ms. Easter alluded to, may not meet their desired results, right? And so I think having these, having things like retreats and bringing people to the table, especially our community, our stakeholders, as she mentioned, will really enhance what we offer from a school perspective or a health perspective in Mr. Neal's particular arena of specialization.
Thank you. So we do have I'm trying to keep my comments to myself. I have so many, but I wanted to kind of get to some of the questions that were asked. Ms. Easter, one of the questions was, how important is expectations on the part of school staff towards students that they have in their classrooms?
Huge. What I hope it never happens inside of a classroom, but unfortunately sometimes does, is that we can love kids to mediocrity. That is something that we talk about all the time, is that, sometimes a label such as eco-dis, at risk, can set a standard of an expectation, or special education, EL, that those expectations are minimal, right? Like, this student can only reach this far of the bar because they've already been labeled as having deficits that they come with, right? So we've got to change that narrative so that the expectations are, how do we ensure that high quality learning is happening for all students, no matter their background, their socio-emotional or levels? None of that should matter when we think about how we increase the potential of students to be able to exit our system and be ready for their adulthood, or whatever that's going to look like as they go into the future.
Thank you, ma'am. And then another question was, for Sergeant Sneed, the community retreat idea is interesting. How do you think Georgetown could develop a similar approach?
Well, I always think that everything that happens successful has to have support from the top down, right? Myself, Ms. Easter, Mr. Neal, we only have so much authority to implement things, and if it does, it's just impacting that small pool of people. Whereas if we go from a global approach, and I say a district-wide approach, then it becomes a district, and you start to change culture by doing that. So in our community retreats, the superintendent requires that every leader in the school district be a part of that communication. It's very sometimes it's difficult to hear some of the things that are being said, but it's important because if you're listening to understand, not to be understood. And so we found that by doing this, I'll give you a good quick example. In our discipline, the person who wrote our student code of conduct never ever solicited advice from the community. It was written from a total administrative mentality. And once the community weighed in and he said, I don't know why I never did this before. Everything they're saying makes complete sense. Why we didn't think of this before. And so I'm very excited about the direction that the district is going and the leadership that we have right now pushing and driving this train. And these are not going to be just a passing meetings. These are going to be ongoing. And the superintendent has committed to that as long as she is there, that we're going to have these ongoing meetings and these discussions. And hopefully the things that we're hearing become less and less redundant or chronic, that we're having this.
Okay.
We may have, as we go, we've got all of our partners at the table, helps to figure out this is of real importance. It's past and current.
Thank you. So I have a question for you all. There's lots of nonprofits, there's lots of organizations out there that are trying to inform and help the community, and GCCMA is one of those organizations. How can GCCMA be of assistance? One of the things that I think we find difficult in reaching the community to inform them of what's going on and how the community can become more engaged. So how can GCCMA and other organizations similar to GCCMA help you in accomplishing the things that we've discussed today? We'll start with Mr. Neal.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, could I take a stab first? So thank you. I would say that we have a Healthy Williamson County collaborative that's been in place for over 11 years, and I would say no one can do this alone. That's the best way for your organization to leverage other organizations, including the hospital systems and other non-for-profits who we partner with. We have a lot of different focuses. So I would say become a member of Healthy Williamson County, because you're able to leverage the partnerships that we have within our network. And the great thing about that collaborative is that we have on-time data that you can leverage for funding. And we have partners that have done that. Some of our partners who are able to do so, such as some of our hospital systems, pay into the collaborative, because what we can't get from the state of Texas and the Department of State Health Services is on-time data. It's typically out of date, and it doesn't allow us to quickly leverage funding so we can remain a healthy county. So that would be my recommendation, is to join us, because we've proven that collaborative does work.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Sergeant Sneed? Oh, you're on mute, sir. You're on mute.
Thank you. Sorry. So I'll go back to my earlier statement of who we put in office, who we vote into our school boards, to our city council, to our legislature, to our governor, is going to set the tone for how the system either changes or remains the same, or even could get worse, right? So getting out and voting and making sure that we have representation on those particular levels is probably the most instrumental part of change. Voting people in who share our ideologies, our theory, and our mission is going to be very crucial to any effective change in any organization or entity. So I'm going to go back to voting and utilizing our votes, because our votes are our voice.
Thank you. And Ms. Easter?
Everything that they said. I think what we're talking about here is the importance of leadership.
We can barely hear you. We can barely hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So everything these gentlemen said, I will say that I think we're talking about leadership and the importance of leadership and how leadership empowers how decisions are made and carried out. You know, whether it be your voting, whether it be the position of people you're hiring to lead a district, to lead a campus, the classroom teachers you're hiring, any of those aspects of how we serve our community are very important. If we want to get movement on any type of actions that we have to learn how to make sure that we are bringing in people into our organization, into our mission and vision that want to live that work. Because if you don't have people who want to live that work, you won't ever get to the actions that you're desiring to get to. And so I think that is critical moving forward, that we continue to vote, but we also make sure that we're empowering leaders that want to make sure that they're living out the mission and vision of what we have.
Well, everyone, can you believe it? We've talked and discussed and gotten some very critical information that we need to take and take on that call of action. And I just want to thank our panelists for participating and giving us this insight. And now we really have to all ask ourselves, so what are we going to do with this? You know, are we going to share this? Remember, this will be posted on the GCCMA website. Have other people come and listen and engage, right? This is an important conversation, and as long as we're continuing to try, we can do better, right? An old saying that I have, each one, reach one, each one, teach one. You know, we have to be there for each other. So I thank you, Mr. Derrick Neal, Ms. Latoya Easter, and Sergeant Wayne Smith. You were excellent, and hopefully this is not our last conversation. Know that GCCMA, again, is a resource for you, and we will definitely know that you're a resource for us. And we're here to help you engage in the community however we can. I do want to thank Ms. Paulette Taylor, our president, Ms. Alma Allen Johnson. She wasn't able to be here today, but thank her for all of her hard work. She's the chair of the committee, and all of the GCCMA members that helped pull this together. We definitely want to thank the community for engaging in this conversation and hoping that you will continue the conversation and engage and be intentional about the engagement, right? So the next thing that we have up, Juneteenth, next Saturday, we are going to have an in-person celebration, right? Our special guest speaker will be Wesley Jarman. We will have Chad Jackson will be a guest artist, and Saving Grace Praise Team will also be there performing also. And if you're not familiar with the Shotgun House, that's a picture of the Shotgun House, and it's at 801 West Street in Georgetown, Texas. The in-person program is from 12 to 1 o'clock. We want to see you in the place. More dynamic conversation, and we just look forward to seeing you there. We pray that you have a wonderful day. And again, thank you, panelists, for a wonderful conversation. Everyone have a wonderful and blessed day.
Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.